What are your thoughts on the passing of President Bush?
Oh, I think it's a tremendous loss for politics around the world that such a president of the United States of high accomplishment and such a gentleman in life is lost to us all. I think it's an enormous loss, not just for the United States, but for all people who are engaged in active politics.
And what do you remember of the man who was George H.W. Bush?
The last time I was with him was the 28th of September. I went down to Kennebunkport with Mila. We always stayed with him. For 30 years, we spent Labor Day weekend pretty well with them at their home on Walker's Point. And I went back there this year to accept the George Bush Presidential Medal of Public Service and to make a speech on his behalf. By this time, he was in his wheelchair. He couldn't move pretty well, hardly could speak. But he had that twinkle in his eye, and so we spent time with him at home, at his home. And then we had the dinner. He couldn't attend the dinner. I spoke at the dinner. But he wanted to hear the speech before, so I gave it to him before as well. He wanted to listen to some music, and we did that, and talked a lot. James Baker was there with us. We were staying at his home. So it was just a delightful experience, and my last visit with him after all these years. And Barbara, of course, had passed in April. We had been at Houston for her funeral, and here was our good friend George, and he was saying goodbye. I think we both knew that that was probably the last visit we were going to have.
What do you think will be the enduring legacy of his and your relationship, and also his relationship with Canada itself?
He was a great friend of Canada, and he made very important things possible for Canadian history. First, the Acid Rain Treaty between Canada and the United States. I had fought for 4 years with the Reagan administration to try and get this matter going. We did get it going, but we didn't get it resolved. And when George Bush came in, he made it his business that an acid rain treaty could come about from a Clean Air Act. And he signed it up in Canada. In those days, acid rain was the #1 environmental challenge for Canadians. And now it doesn't exist because the acid rain treaty that I signed with George Bush has gotten rid of it. So that was a tremendous contribution that he made to Canada. And secondly, he was responsible for NAFTA. And NAFTA today represents 500 million people with 7% of the world's population. It generates 28% of the world's wealth and creates tens and tens of millions of jobs. This is, and $1.2 trillion a year in business back and forth. This is the richest trade agreement in the history of the world. This came from George Bush.
What memories do you have of working with him on NAFTA?
Well, this was a tough thing because we were bringing in Mexico. So you had two G7 countries, highly developed economies, Canada and the United States, working for the first time in a free trade agreement with a developing country, Mexico. That was not easy. And so Bush and I spent a lot of time getting around corners and things like that to make certain that we could make it work. And it did. And look at the results today.
You are one of a select few who've been asked to participate in his eulogy. What was your reaction to being asked, and what do you think you're going to say?
Well, he called me 3 years ago and asked me if I would speak at his funeral. And I said, George, I don't want to talk about that today. And, and he said, you're going to have to talk about it, Brian, because I've got to make these arrangements. And so I said, okay. I'd be honored to do it. And so now I've got to go down there Wednesday and do it. I spent a little time on it, and I'm not finished yet. But I think I know what I want to say.
What's that?
I can't tell you, because I may change my mind.
He, when he was running to be president, said that he wanted it to be a kinder, gentler
Yes.
America. Looking at the difference of him to what is now.
Yeah.
Do you think that he'll ever be able to achieve, or that America will be able to achieve what he was hoping for?
Well, while he was there, he achieved it. And that's all one can do, you know. Bill Clinton came after him, and Bill maintained that general attitude. And then it was George W., I think, and then Obama. So, you know, the groundwork was laid by George Herbert Walker Bush, and America would be well advised to stay on that track.